Noctua has built a pretty huge portfolio of CPU coolers over the last few years, ranging from little monsters all the way up to coolers big enough to request their own postal code. Right in the center of them all sits their NH-U12 line of coolers, a great all-rounder. Not too big, so that it still fits, and good considering the size. But definitely not a comparison to the bigger brother. But now add some nice looking color, feed it steroids for a whole year, and throw not only one, but two of Noctua's already steroid-fed NF-A12X25 Chromax.Black fans, and you got yourself this powerhouse of a cooler. So this is the Noctua NH-U12A, a small yet surprisingly powerful cooler. But I'm guessing that based on the intro you already knew where this is going. So let's quickly go over every aspect before we get to the fun part. This small single tower cooler measures 158mm in height, 125mm in width and 112mm in depth. Although the cooler becomes laughably thin once the fans are removed, make no mistake, this is not an entry-level cooler. Using a total of 7 copper heat pipes and a shockingly big nickel-plated copper base, this thing is absolutely packed to the roof. To make things even more shocking, Noctua packs this with two of their new NF-A12X25 fans, which in the end created this mini monster of a cooler. And although the fans used on here are like 99% identical to their independently available counterparts rocking 2000 RPM with 60 CFM at 2.34mm of H2O, they just look like they have a bit more fun in life. We already released the review about the NF-A12X25 fans, and if you haven't seen it, you definitely should after this video, as we will be going a bit deeper in there. But to make it short, yes, this is a very good idea. Even on the product page, Noctua explains that due to a optimized 7 heat pipes design and 37% more fin area, their newest U12A version basically acts like a 140mm size cooler and a 120mm size form factor. If this is true or not, we will see in the benchmark section, but Noctua surely is not playing around here. This smaller form factor also has another positive aspect. Due to the fan never actually reaching over the RAM slots, the U12A is basically 100% RAM compatible. When it comes to compatibility, we get pretty much everything we need. LGA 1200 every 1150, 2011, 2066 and the newest LGA 1700 out of the box for Team Blue. On Team Red, we've got AM4 covered as well as everything older until the older FM1 socket. To quickly go over the installation process, it's the usual Noctua Seco Firm 2-way. For Team Blue on LGA 17, 12 and 1100, use the included backplate and shove the silver Intel screws through the appropriate hole, the outer one for 1700 and the inner one for everything else, and fix them using the screw holders. After positioning the backplate behind the motherboard, we need to position the spacers on the screws, the blue ones for LGA 1700 and the black ones for everything else. From there, we can install the mounting brackets, so position them using the central holes for LGA 1700 and the outer ones for everything else and screw it down. Over on AMD's side, we first need to remove the pre-installed retention brackets, and from there we can position the spacers on top, grey for AM4, white for everything else, followed by the provided retention brackets with the inner holes being meant for AM4 and the outer ones being for everything else, and screw it down. And from there on both platforms we can finally put some of that included thermal paste on the CPU and mount the heatsink on top using the provided screwdriver. When it comes to other included things, Noctua also provides you with the usual Noctua gluable badge and a 2-to-1 PWM splitter to run both of these amazing fans using a single PWM header. And then there is this again. Just like with the NH-D15, Noctua includes two LNAs or low noise adapters. And again, these are not extensions, do not mistake them as such. These are meant to cripple your max fan speed down to 1700 RPM, and although not everybody shares my opinion on this, I still believe that these are unnecessary. The fans are PWM controllable, crippling my max fan speed from the start limits my headroom, and I do not believe that this is a good idea. But hey, they are free, so okay. At this point, I guess we have everything covered, so let's finally get to the good stuff. Benchmark. We tried the NH-U12A Chromax.Black using our Ryzen 3900X at 4.36 GHz and 1.4 volts V-core. Running at 100% fan speed, Noctua's newest approach reached 49 above ambient. That's a single degree behind the D15 and basically putting everything else to shame. Well, I guess Noctua wasn't joking about this thing performing like a big boy cooler. This little thing jumped ahead of every 240 AIO and even beat a couple of 360s, not even talking about big boy air coolers like a Noctua Pro 4 or Arctic Freezer 50. This ain't funny anymore. Once we turned down the fan speed in 10% decrement, it didn't become any worse. Here we were able to see how misplaced this cooler really is. Starting off just behind the D15, it kept up battling with it until the very end, where it even took the lead at 30% speed. Though, take this with a grain of salt, because at that level of heat and slow fan speed, even my presence in the room can make a difference. But the real fun part is the fact that, based on its size, the NH-U12A should be somewhere a bit in front of the Akaza Soho H4. Sure, the H4 comes with a single fan, but still, the U12A should be competing with that kind of fan and not beating the crap out of everything we've got except for the bigger available Noctua counterpart. But the biggest competition is still noise normalized. Once we've done that, we were able to see that the U12A is still beating the crap out of every air cooler, but this time it wasn't limited to the D15, as at some point around 54 degrees C above ambient, the U12A managed to outperform its bigger counterpart in terms of noise, and later on ending up at the very top, and therefore for the very first time beating the Noctua Pro 4. Funnily enough, Noctua really wasn't lying. This impressive little beast is capable of outperforming a bunch of bigger coolers using 140 fans. But more impressive for me is that they managed to pull this off while making sure that the NH-D15 still stays relevant. Sure, it's just a single degree in our benchmarks, but still, the D15 is better and the U12A is just behind him. I don't want to go too deep into the design part of this cooler, as it will mostly be determined by the fans. And as I said in the NF-A12 review, these are monsters. They just look like shit is about to go down, and it really did in the end, a lot. In the end, it's a Chromax.Black Noctua cooler and it looks clean, and in no way can it be described as cheap. It feels sturdy, robust, and definitely a top-of-the-line purchase. But if you don't like the plain blackness, no worries. Noctua also released a bunch of heatsink covers called NA-HC7 and HC8. The HC8 exists in white or black, and the HC7 is a swap version, which similarly to the usual swap Noctua products, comes with different colors for you to swap. Installing one of these covers is fairly easy. Position the grey plastic thing on your heatsink, clip it in using the provided Noctua clip, and just position the cover on it, and voila, it's different. Looking at all the available options, I'm sure that you will find something that fits for you, but I am personally going to stick with no cover because I'm just enjoying to see that ridiculous heat pipe to heat sink ratio that Noctua put in here. Okay, what could have been better about this cooler? Well, in terms of performance or noise, like absolutely nothing. It makes complete sense that Noctua's mid-range cooler should be slightly behind the biggest model, and they absolutely crush it with it. It is just a single degree behind the D15, and the U12A lands exactly where it should be, outperforming every other air cooler we had so far. On the noise side, however, these made out of Starox NF-A12s really shine, as the U12A outperform our complete inventory above 54 degrees C. But what's really interesting here is the size to performance comparison. Directly comparing the giant D15 to the relatively small U12A next to it, it's pretty incredible that they managed to pack D15 level of performance into a form factor that fits into the average mid-tower case. A truly impressive result that Noctua managed to deliver here. On the price side, it gets a bit complicated. As of writing the script, the NH-U12A is going for around 120 euros, and that's about 10 to 15 euros above the D15. And it's a bit of a complicated position to say that Noctua's biggest thing is not the most expensive one. But the way that I see it, the U12A is like a compact version capable of performing almost as good, but with better noise. And comparing size to performance to price, I do believe that currently the U12A Chromax.Black is by far the best option that Noctua offers. Plus, I just think it's kind of funny that these little fans managed to push that tiny heatsink to the level of a 360 rad. To end this, I still have a small could have been better that I came across while doing my benchmarks, and this applies to basically every Noctua cooler out there. While using an AMD CPU, I am unable to remove the screw of the heatsink to an extent where the thread of the bracket is no longer keeping the heatsink in place. And I'm not talking holding. The screw is completely out of the thread, but that little piece sticking out of it, which is a bit thinner, is still inside of the piece of the heatsink. This then prevents me from giving the cooler that little twist before pulling it out of the CPU. Now in a perfect world I wouldn't care, but with an AMD CPU the risk is pretty high that you will rip that thing off the board, and I ripped out my 3900X. To make matters worse, I had the perfect scenario. I tried removing the cooler literally 20 seconds after doing my last benchmark, and the thing was still hot as hell and the thermal paste was liquidish as hell. And in the end, it seems like the thermal paste managed to create like some sort of suction effect, and because that little thing sticking out of the bracket prevented me from giving it a little twist and therefore limiting the surface area of that suction, this led to the inevitable me ripping out the CPU of the socket. And by the way, the sound is horrible. It sounds like a very slowly detaching Velcro strip, but a really expensive Velcro strip. I guess this then comes down to manufacturing tolerances in combination with that little ring that keeps the screw from falling out of its hole. So I guess I was just really unlucky here, but I would appreciate if Noctua could add some sort of quality control for this, or very slightly shorten that outsticking piece, which would resolve the issue altogether. But other than that tiny thing, which will pretty much only happen to people installing the cooler like 20 times a day, very impressive cooler, and I absolutely recommend it. At this point, I would like to thank you for watching and Noctua for providing me this monster and the monsters covers. And if you want to keep watching, have a look at the dedicated NF-A12X25 Chromax.Black review. They will go a bit deeper about how they were able to pull this off. Anyway, thank you for watching and see you in the next one. Bye bye.